Into the second installment of Stigma-Free Learning Live here at the Stigma-Free Society. So if this is your first time tuning in to our live event, welcome. It's so great to have you here. I'm just going to give you a bit of background on the Stigma-Free Society and myself before we dive into this second installment of Stigma-Free Learning Live. So the Stigma-Free Society is a Canadian registered charity that's been around since 2010. And the purpose of the charity is to eliminate and reduce stigma of all kinds with a focus on mental health. And at Stigma-Free, we work to do this through preventative education around mental health and around stigma to create awareness and understanding and acceptance, and to help use education to reduce and eliminate stigma. So a little bit of background on me, if you're new to this live event, hello. My name is Samara. I am the programs manager at the Stigma-Free Society. I have a background in education as well as equity. My bachelor's degree is in equity studies, and I have a master's in teaching. And I also have a professional development certification in early years mental health. So I have a deep passion for and understanding of issues around equity and diversity and mental health and stigma. And I'm so excited to create these lesson plans and downloadable resources that are housed on the Student Mental Health Toolkit. And those are the resources that we are going to be referring to and pulling from for this bi-weekly live event. So the purpose of Stigma-Free Learning Live, if you're new here, is to give educators the opportunity to get a deeper understanding of the lesson plans that are on the Student Mental Health Toolkit. So each week I will be walking you through one of the lesson plans and talking about the purpose of it, why I decided to create a lesson on the topic, why I chose the videos I chose, why I chose the activities I chose, and to better equip you to implement these lessons in your classrooms. So I hope that you find this learning educational and that you are able to use and adapt these resources in your classrooms so that you can provide your students with education around mental health and around stigma and all of these very timely and important issues. So the lesson we're going to be delving into today is part of the older age bracket for our Student Mental Health Toolkit. So if you are a teacher for grades 8 to 12, this lesson plan and this Stigma-Free Learning Live installment will be perfect for you. So the lesson plan that we're looking at today is the corresponding lesson that we looked at last week for the younger ages. And this lesson plan is called Facing Calls to Action and Historical Heroes. So when I created this lesson, it was an adaptation of the original lesson that I created, which was the first lesson plan that I created for the Stigma-Free Society. And I wanted to give older students the opportunity to have a similar resource to the younger students around the ideas that we delved into the first lesson plan that I spoke about. So if you want to follow along, you can open up the Facing Calls to Action and Historical Heroes lesson plan in the Student Mental Health Toolkit for grades 8 to 12. So the content areas and the curriculum connections that we are going to be looking at for this lesson plan are English language and social studies. So the purpose and intention of this lesson is to really understand the calls to action that your students may face and to look at it from the perspective of historical heroes. So there have been many iconic historical individuals who have done so much to create positive change in the world that we live in. And I really wanted your students to understand and see how they too can step into these roles when they are faced with a call to action. So a call to action is a moment in time where a person is faced with an opportunity to either take action and face injustice head on, or to take a step back and to not engage. And I think now more than ever, it's important to face those calls to action bravely and with an understanding of why it's important to stand up for each other and to stand up for ourselves and to stand up for groups of people and society at large when it comes to issues of inequity and in issues of social justice and stigma. So I'm using, again, the metaphor of the hero's journey. If you tuned in last week, the lesson plan for the younger ages also looks at this metaphor. And I think it's a really, really great entry point to this conversation around becoming a hero and facing calls to action and understanding how we can be allies and we can step in moments where we face injustice in our lives and in the world. So again, the hero's journey is that idea of a person reaching a call to action and taking the opportunity to face it bravely and to do something about it and to really make a difference. So if you want to look at the curriculum competencies for this lesson plan, again, it's the English language arts and the social studies. So these two areas are very well connected to this lesson plan and this topic, especially the English language category, because, the metaphor of the hero's journey is a trope that we find in so much popular culture, but also literature. So your students will be able to really make those connections between the English language curriculum and the metaphor of the hero's journey and all of these, fictional characters that they've seen that fit into that metaphor. And then the social studies piece is the historical element that we're going to be looking into. So understanding historical events and historical figures and how they've made changes in the world through actions and events. So the video that I put in this lesson plan that your students will be watching at the beginning of this lesson is really there to give some context and some background on the metaphor of the hero's journey. So I wanted your students to have a really fun and engaging way to learn about the metaphor that will carry through this lesson plan. So if you click on that video and watch it yourself, you'll see that it really connects to the understanding of the hero and how all of these, these literary heroes and these fictional characters that we find in pop culture, in movies, in TV shows, in books, really have this moment of a call to action. And there's a cycle that exists for these heroes. And I really wanted that to tie into the historical figures that your students are going to be looking at for this lesson, so they can see how there are parallels between the historical figures and the literary characters, and that they're both heroes, and that the literary characters are often very derived from these historical figures that we know and that we love and that have made such important change in the world. So the guiding questions around this video include things like, how do heroes respond to calls to action according to the hero's journey? And what calls to action have you faced in your life? So getting your students to spark the thinking around how, they faced call to actions, as we all do in our lives. And then the last question, I think, is the most key question in this lesson, which is, how do the ways we respond to calls to action impact the world? So I really want this to be the starting point for the understanding and the deep dive into understanding how we can make a difference and how facing a call to action can have this big ripple effect in society and with people at large. So after you watch the video and you spark the guiding questions to get the discussion going with your students, I want you to do a mind map activity with your students. So this is going to create a visual aid to ground the rest of the lesson. And I want you to create a mind map that really starts to get your students thinking about all of the fictional characters and the historic heroes that they know that really fall into this metaphor of the hero's journey. So you can have, different bubbles that have fictional characters and that one that has historic characters, and there can be offshoots of those, and you can see how some of them kind of overlap and intersect. So the next piece is going to be where you connect the metaphor of the hero's journey to the concept of activism. So I want you to really start brainstorming and thinking about with your students what historical figures they've teased out and what historical figures they've put on that mind map, and how those historical figures have, faced that kind of character arc of the hero's journey, for example, and what led to them stepping into their role. What call to action did they face that made them be this historical figure that we know? And what was the outcome of that? What movements existed around their calls to action or because of their calls to action? And then you're going to explain the curriculum connections to your students. So the big active piece of this lesson, as I like to call it, is you're going to have your students do a creative writing piece around a historical figure that they've chosen. And they're going to do some research about this historical figure. And they're going to use that information to inform their writing. And they're going to use the metaphor and the story arc of the hero's journey to write a story about their historical figure. So let's say, for example, they choose Ruth Bader Ginsburg as the historical figure that they want to write about. So they can look at her early life and what really inspired her to become this iconic feminist hero that we all know of today. And they can use that background information to inform this writing piece. So it can take any form they like. It can be a storybook, a comic book, a poem, a short story, a song, anything that really inspires them. But I want them to really use that hero's journey metaphor and that character and that story arc to really ground whatever they choose to write about. So some accommodations and modifications for your students who might need some additional support. They can use technological assistance if they require that for writing or for reading. They can also use the text-to-speech accommodation on their technology, or they can recite their piece to you and you can act as a scribe if they need to do that as well. And for students whose first language is not English, they are more than welcome to write their story in their native language first, and then you can help them translate that to English. So that is really the big piece of this lesson, is that time that it's going to take them to research and write on their historical figure. And, they're welcome to use the examples that you created as a class in that mind map, but they're also more than welcome to pick somebody that they really feel inspired by. So really make sure that you're giving them a lot of opportunities to see how many remarkable historical figures there are that fit into this metaphor of the hero's journey. So the follow-up activity for this lesson is an opportunity for your students to share what they've written. So this can be in either small groups or in pairs, and you're also welcome to share their story. They can share their story with the class if you have time for that and if you choose to do so. I think that's a really great way for them to also present it to their class and have pride in what they've written. I really think that that is a really important piece of education, is sharing with each other. I think there's so much value in your students learning from each other's work and from each other's experiences and from each other's heroes. And I think that really take the time to focus on this as kind of the follow-up and the wrap-up piece of this lesson. And then the final piece is the lesson closure. So I really think it's great to kind of use this to spark a discussion around activism with your students and really explore the idea that we are all faced with calls to action. There is injustice in the world, and whether or not we choose to do something about it is really up to us. And I really want your students to see that every historical figure that they wrote about was faced with a call to action similar to ones that they will face at some point in their life. And even if they don't do all of these big macro scale incredible things that these historical heroes that they've researched do, being involved in activism is so important and can really be so small as just showing up to a protest or sharing a petition online or speaking to a family member and getting them engaged in something that they feel passionate about when it comes to injustice. So really allow your students to take this time to connect those things and also to connect this to the idea of mental health. I think when we're talking about activism, there's so much there that we can connect to the idea of mental health. So much of injustice is so deeply intersected with mental health. And, let your students see that when we face a call to action, when we step in, when we do something to support somebody or to face injustice, we're doing that for the mental health of the people that we're supporting and for ours as well. I think there's something really empowering and something that really can promote mental well-being is knowing that you're doing something good for other people. It kind of takes you out of yourself, and it's a really great way to support yourself and to support the needs of others and to stand up for those who have been silenced. That's a really important piece of this as well. So that's the lesson, and that's the overview of it. I really hope that you found this Stigma-Free Learning Live helpful. I really hope that you use this lesson plan with your students and give them the opportunity to really understand how they can be allies and they can be activists and they can use their historical heroes and emulate them in their own lives to create a better world and to be activists and to, make that positive change. I really feel inspired by the concept of the metaphor of the hero's journey. I think we are all heroes and we all have these calls to action. And when we face them and when we are brave, we can do so much to change the world. So that's it for me today. Thank you so much. I hope you found this valuable. I hope you will use this lesson with your students. And I hope you'll tune in again next week when we're going to dive into another lesson plan on the Student Mental Health Toolkit. Again, my name is Samara Liberman, and this has been Stigma-Free Learning Live with the Stigma-Free Society. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you